What's up, YouTube? I'm back. Welcome to another live stream of Logical, Plausible, Probable. I decided to do this one. So I had a 3.5 hour live stream earlier today. Got pretty interesting, to say the least. Over the course of the day, between that and my videos about atheist fantasyland projection complex and how to trigger an atheist, I've been getting a bunch of people coming after me, which is kind of cracking me up, as they are fulfilling the definition of triggered in many cases. But tonight I'm going to talk a little bit more about the argument I make on a regular basis that evolutionists and atheists regularly suspend rational thought in an effort to justify the lack of rationality in their conclusions. What's up, Honesty Angel? How you doing? Thanks for stopping by. So anyway, where I'm going with all this is some of the positions that are taken and the arguments that they make that say anybody who's a theist, an intelligent design advocate, any of those types of positions are, God of the gaps. We aren't using reason, we're not using evidence, we're not using logic, and are just running around with blind faith. Which is ironic given the fact that people like myself are not founding our arguments in philosophy, nor do I found my arguments in scripture. And it's kind of funny when there's been multiple occasions in debates and in comments in responses to my videos and such where I have not in any way, shape, form, or fashion mentioned religion in any context. You're just a Bible thumper. All you do is rely on the Bible insert religious facet into the equation. And it's like, have you guys, number one, not actually listened to what I've said? And number two, have you not actually thought about the points that are being made and considered them from a rational perspective? Which leads to the title of this one is, do triggered atheists suspend rational thought? And I agree with you, Honesty Angel. Faith isn't blind, and you can come to a conclusion based on the evidence that you are looking at and determine what you believe is you conclude is the most rational position. And in my interactions with the guys in my live stream earlier today, it was interesting how, as we got into, the complexities, and I was making the argument that, the second you remove the intelligent agent from the equation, you have to 100% account for all of the improbabilities, and you have to explain, an exorbitant amount of variables that are required to reach your end conclusion. And yet I was being accused, or am being accused on a regular basis, of God of the gaps, even though I would postulate that the conclusion that I'm making is actually a prime example of Occam's razor, in it being the solution with the fewest variables and the most plausibility in terms of, the accounting for the primary variables. And it's so funny how, they so often they immediately run over to the, people used to think lightning was thrown by Zeus. You're making the exact same type of example in context of life and existence of the universe and all those kind of things. And I'm like, you're you're really grasping at straws, folks. Grasping at straws and you're basically insulting human intellect in the modern times. I mean, we didn't really have much understanding of physics and chemistry 2,000 years ago when people were viewing lightning as, and thunder as, symbols, signals from the gods. In the context of the arguments I make in relation to intelligent design, I am in no way, shape, form, or fashion suggesting that the processes through which life exists are not natural forces. I am arguing that the original catalyst had to require a intelligent agent. And I find it so interesting how, in these conversations and these back and forth debates and such, the atheists will readily accept that, situation A is impossible unless you have an intelligent person that understands all the processes to make it work and put it all together. Situation A, 100% impossible. Even though, from a theoretical perspective, it is possible, right? On the flip side, when it comes to our existence, even though the likelihood is even lower than the situation that we're talking about, they still will argue that it's more reasonable and it's totally rational to conclude that it happened through undirected process. And which is why I say this whole premise of, do atheists, especially when they're triggered, suspend rational thought, takes on more and more credence. And it kind of leads me to the some of the standard talking points that get thrown at me. Oh, you're all you do is straw man. It's like, man, if I have to hear that one more time, it's gonna I'm just gonna start laughing at their continued propositions that the evidence that I'm laying out that attacks their position is nothing but a straw man argument. It's like, do you even? I actually honestly wonder what the actual percentage of the folks, the atheists who are commenting in live chats over on MDD or on my channel or SFT or any of them. I honestly wonder how many of them actually know the definitions of the terms they throw out, the philosophical models and such they toss out. Straw man, special pleading, argument from ignorance, argument of incredulity. Begging the question. They toss all these things out, and so often they're in completely out of context or not applicable to the argument, unless you have suspended rational thought in regards to whether or not the argument that's being made is actually a reasonable one that has an evidentiary component to it, whether it be empirical or as a result of induction or deduction. It doesn't remove from the equation whether or not the questions being raised are valid. And then you take it to a completely different angle, and you've got people who want to reduce everything to a building the straw man honesty. It's yep, always building the straw man. But it's pretty funny in the comment section of my last couple of videos about the triggered atheists. I've gotten a whole boatload of messages about straw man, which is why I was bringing it up. Just kind of cracks me up. And it's like, I'm literally presenting an argument of why my argument is valid and is not a straw man. And you're accusing me of making nothing but straw man arguments when I just presented a whole logic flow of why I think you're wrong. And so again, it circles back around to or have they suspended rationality, reason, logic, and any kind of real attempt to analyze whether or not their worldview is correct. And this kind of leads me to components of a conversation I have on a regular basis with people in the in the business industry, with the skyrocketing number of people who do not seem to have critical thinking skills and the ability to actually analyze and come to their own conclusions. Instead, they seem to rely on what they have been told or how they have been told to think, not actually having original thought for themselves and to create their own conclusions based on the taking a look and doing research for themselves, analyzing things and saying, I agree with this, but not that. This one, not this one. Oh, I see how that works. And then you now have the intuition and the knowledge base to be able to come to your own conclusion. And it's kind of like in my first video on the Atheist Fantasyland projection complex, the whole element of lack of critical thinking skills, spikes in anger, obsessions, different things that just showcase what I'm talking about that's happening in the employment industry as well, in business, of if you're not going to reach your own conclusion by actually going into and looking at the arguments that are being made, and instead are just accepting what you are told on face value, then two things are going to occur. Number one, you're going to easily be a sheep that can be manipulated in any direction. And number two, you're setting yourself up, whether it be from a philosophical perspective or a professional one, you're setting yourself up to fall on your face. And then I guess number three, when some of these positions that you have espoused without actually thinking for yourself, when you realize that they're wrong, you're going to feel a major collapse in your sense of self-worth, because your elements that you have considered to be fundamental in your life have now been shattered. And as Honestly Angel is talking about, they don't teach logic in school. And that is very true. I mean, it's absolutely true. And, if you're not being taught to think and how to reason, and you're setting yourself up for some major issues in general in life. But I think that is showcased in a lot of the debates that we watch here on YouTube. It's like people don't have the capacity to comprehend if a argument is actually sound, even if they don't agree with it, and the counterpoints that are made are very often emotional responses to what they're viewing as an attack on their self-worth, rather than an intellectual concept and position to recognize, analyze, and respond to, versus just having a inherent emotional reaction. And the more when I think about this kind of stuff in the context of just general day-to-day things, but you extrapolate that out to contemplating our existence and how we view the world and view our purpose. The point that Nicholas is making right there: those who don't have the spirit of truth don't have the spirit of truth. That's very true. They, as the Bible says, they're blind. The natural man is blind. But I honestly wonder if part of the reason that these staunch atheists are so hesitant and reticent to even consider alternatives to their worldview is that they've tied their own sense of self-worth to this belief system. And it's ironic I get back in the context of, the rational thought component. The number of times I've heard people talk about, or atheists respond with, you have no, if you don't think this is your only element of your existence, how could you possibly appreciate your life and want to go out and make the most of your existence? And I'm like, okay, let's think about this for 1 second. Your worldview, which postulates that there is nothing outside of this level of existence, somehow leads you to believe that somebody who thinks there is dramatically more purpose and expansion opportunities for the mark you can leave on the world, leave on your existence, not just in the context of this mortal coil, but from the eternal context. They somehow conclude that leads to a smaller worldview versus a larger one. And I honestly don't understand how you can come to that you can think that's a rational conclusion to reach, especially when they are noticing and doing studies on things like people who think there is nothing after this life when they get into later stages of life, where they're kind of, verifying the validity and the worth of what they have done as they're recognizing this life is coming to a close. Those who believe in further, life after death, more to their existence beyond this, it was very interesting. Not all, obviously, but a significant percentage of them, they found two significant factors. Number one, those who thought there was more to existence beyond this life were dramatically more open to admitting they were wrong, accepting a complete 180 to a position they'd held for years and years and years, because to them, this wasn't the only thing they had to, the only component of their existence, and changing a position they had held didn't invalidate their entire existence. With the atheists and those who just didn't believe, they're in agnostics, they didn't believe there was anything after this life, they were dramatically more rigid in their thought process. This is older ones. I think the same thing logic applies to younger ones too, but they actually studied elderly people in this, and were significantly more reticent to make any modification to their worldview and to their positions, to the level that they were doing the tracking their brain activity and really doing full deep analysis. They were coming to the conclusion that these people weren't even accepting or even considering the fact that the position they had held for their whole life was wrong. And I think we see this exact premise being played out in politics in many aspects of, the average politician, especially in Washington, is relatively old, and they're in that later stage, getting closer to the end. And even when they are presented with categoric evidence that showcases XYZ position they have held is completely wrong and is causing dramatic damage to society at large, the economy, whatever it might be, they continue to hold and project and campaign for strategies and concepts that are known to be failures. And I remember for a couple years ago, I won't get into politics too much, but anyway, the point I'm making is when you go back to the suspension of rational thought for the atheist, when you really think about, the evidence that is being put forth. The other day I watched part of the T-Jump and Matt Dillahunty debate, and they are so hesitant to even consider whether or not really any evidence is rational. And obviously the Christians were trying to present things from the context of the religious experience, and the we're putting forth one of their positions that what about the hundreds of millions of people who talk about having a religious experience and some sort of personal connection with God? And the immediate response from Dillahunty and T-Jump was, we can't actually take that seriously. That is not real evidence. That's just anecdotal. And, why would we take that seriously? And I was kind of thinking about that of, like in my own context of, I never had a conversation with God after my brain surgery, but while I was laying in ICU, I knew beyond all doubt that I was going to be okay. And I mean, it was one of the most calm moments of my life, as I was facing what anybody else would have considered facing death or being a vegetable. And when I think about that calm, that moment, it was like a line of demarcation that occurred, and things have played out, not in every way that I would have anticipated by any stretch of the imagination, but at the same time, the knowledge that I was going to be fine never wavered. And I don't think people, until you've had one of those moments, it may be difficult to comprehend or to take seriously what other people are saying. But if hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people over decades and decades and decades and centuries of people have all talked about this, at some point you have to start considering at least whether or not there is merit to this ongoing trend, if you will, that so either you're saying that a gigantic percentage of the population are all nuts, or you have to consider, hey, you're the one that's not being rational when it comes to considering whether or not this is a component that I should potentially put into my analysis, not necessarily of this is the only reason I'm going to believe that a God might exist, but it is one of many factors. And that's one of the, that one of many factors argument, or I just guess position that I was talking about earlier today. Hey, you've got 99, you got 100 pieces of evidence. You argue and say, hey, I might be able to explain one of the 100, but I'm just going to ignore the other 99 in my consideration of whether the single one that I'm looking at is actually my conclusion about the single one that I'm looking at is actually the most logical, plausible, and probable conclusion when viewed in context through the other 99 variables that this person I'm arguing with is using to come to their conclusion. And not to pick on T-Jump and Matt, but when they talk about firsthand eyewitness testimony in court, right? We shouldn't believe that. I'm like, okay, fair enough. I agree. But if you had forensic evidence and an eyewitness testimony and ongoing presentation of all of these different pieces of evidence that pointed to the guilt of the person on trial, to say, well, I'm not sure if I believe the eyewitness, and then saying, because I'm not sure if I believe the eyewitness, I'm going to ignore all of the forensic evidence that was presented. I didn't believe the eyewitness, therefore I'm going with not guilty. Or, hey, there were 20 eyewitnesses. I thought that 50% of them were full of crap. 50% might have been okay. And I'm also going to ignore the fact that there was a significant percentage of people who I thought were valid. And I'm going to ignore them, and I'm going to ignore the forensic evidence because I'm not sure if the other people were 100% correct. I mean, it's when you really start to contemplate and consider, what ultimately is enough for belief in a higher power being the, what level of evidence is required to believe that all these pieces that are being presented to you are the rational conclusion versus the position of the average atheist, which is there is no possibility that this could ever be proven. And if you operate from that perspective, you are ironically doing a reverse God of the gaps argument, right? You think that God must have done it because we can't explain it. And on the flip side, there's no way God could have done it. And even if you present evidence that says he could, I'm going to immediately discount that and say that is not evidence because there is no possible evidence for God to exist. If that's not the epitome of a presupposition that you are literally admitting out loud that you don't think and also don't plan on even considering as valid any evidence that is presented because you have already concluded that there is no chance that God could exist. I mean that's literally what's being put forth by atheists in their tangents. And when I listen to them make these arguments and categorically deny any piece of evidence or logic that I put forth or any other folks put into play, it's like, which one of us is actually being the irrational one? And that's why in the closing, a lot of times in the end of my my opening statements, I say things to the effect of, as you consider the evidence, which one of us is presenting the more logical, plausible, and probable conclusion? Is it those who say that based on the evidence, it is the reasonable conclusion that it is, or that the intelligent agent was required and therefore God, or those who say that no matter how counterintuitive it is, based on observations, based on evidence, based on context, it is not reasonable to conclude this or even to consider this. Therefore, who is the one who is bowing to a God of the gaps? Is it us, or is it the one on the flip side who is dependent on undirected process, chance, and like I said, the gods of chance and chaos being able to result in all these things? And not to spin off on evolution too much for right this second, but the thing that really cracks me up, one of the things that cracks me up about it, is that nature and natural selection are granted these borderline in sentient characteristics that it's like when you're listening to these people describe what was done by nature, like it really sounds like you're describing the characteristics of a sentient being with foreknowledge and all these different kind of characteristics that I've talked about in regards to requirements for God. Okay, that's a little weird, but I don't know. It's pretty funny. Hang on a second, guys. Anyway, the point I'm making on all this is, and it goes back to my whole supposition of atheist fantasyland projection complex. It really feels like in the insults, diatribes, and expositions that they leverage and angle towards anybody arguing in favor of God, intelligent designer, etc., etc. It's like they are almost subconsciously projecting their own state of mind onto us, and as I said, subconsciously, so they don't even realize what is what is going on. But when you expand this, years ago, I was going through some. Let's say I had to hire some lawyers, and the person I was dealing with was being so irrational. I couldn't. We were trying to do negotiation stuff and just could not figure out how, in emails and phone conversations, they were literally saying that what they had done was what we had done. And it's like I'm literally looking at an email and I'm reading it to you out loud as to what you sent. And you're accusing me of doing exactly what you did. Anyway, so I ended up hiring a psychologist, and we started doing some analysis and trying to figure out like what in the heck is going on in this negotiation, because this person is just, what the heck, this doesn't make any sense. Anyway, the psychologist came to the conclusion after talking with me and other folks and looking at the correspondence and the communication, all these different things, and they're like, wow, this person is like a straight up textbook case of narcissistic personality disorder. And one of the interesting symptoms of not just being narcissistic, but having narcissistic personality disorder is that multiple things. Number one, you view people as disposable assets. And it's interesting, when they view you as an advantage or a asset, they are 100% your friend, best friend ever. You're the greatest thing of all time. The second they no longer view you as that asset, then a complete 180 happens. And it's not just they don't want anything to do with you, they become your mortal enemy. And it's like, whoa, okay, that was interesting. But then a secondary component was they actually will project their weaknesses or their negative actions onto the opposing party, and not even realize they're not even doing it consciously. It's not a conscious projection, it's a subconscious projection. And they truly believe that what they are accusing the opponent of, or the person they now view as the opponent, they truly believe that what they actually did was done by the other party. And when they were explaining this whole deal to me, I was like, wow, okay, well, that explains a lot. And I mean, it's a disturbing thing to really think about, of like, holy crap, there's people out there that A, going to view you as a mortal enemy, and B, are going to believe that the things that they have actually done, you did. And then they're going to do everything in their power to try and invalidate you and remove you completely from the equation, rather than just leave you alone. And I think that's an element of suspension of ultimate suspension of rational thought. And I think we see this in so many aspects of just modern society in general. I mean, there's such a dramatic skyrocket in narcissism overall, but with the dramatic decline in self-confidence, sense of self-worth, which I think not all, but a large portion of it is in conjunction and caused by the skyrocket of people who have no faith and belief in anything beyond the mortal coil. I mean, if you're not having a good day and you're feeling bad and you think that there is nothing more to your existence than crap that you're going through right now, I mean, that's a I can't even imagine thinking about that, or thinking or viewing the world in that context. So, in the regards to the atheist, I wager not all of them, but a lot of them view me as a direct threat to their worldview and a direct threat to their sense of self-worth. And myself and other folks, we have now become a mortal enemy. Now, I'm not suggesting we're not talking about violence and all that stuff, but inside their own mind, we are now the enemy that is worthy of attack. And that takes things to an entirely new level of anger, obviously, frustration, and then that suspension of rational thought. It's I honestly don't know how some of these folks go on and continue to. Oh man, hang on a sec, y'all. Sorry, I was reading text there. I got some stuff I gotta do tomorrow. Anyway, trying to think of anything else I wanted to say. If anybody wants to come on and talk for a little bit, I'm gonna post the link in chat. If anyone wants to come on. Hey, Maximilian. Sorry, I just saw your chat that you sent almost 10 minutes ago. Yeah, I'm always careful, man. It's I get your point that you're making there, Maximilian. At the same time, I think there are certain aspects and moments where you have to be willing to accept the challenge and respond not in a hateful way, but in a method that can help to shatter those gigantic walls that have been raised around those walls of the walls of disbelief, as it said, that how can you actually expect how can you expect to cut through the mental clutter and the propaganda and the brainwashing that's been going on for a century regarding evolution, for example? That's a difficult wall to get through. Then if somebody has convinced himself that coupled with other arguments completely dismiss and defeat and negate any credence at all in regards to even a possibility of God's existence, I mean, and then they continue to surround themselves only with people who validate their positions. I mean, I don't really know how you can really expect to have any real success if. No, honestly, it's interesting you say that. I agree with you completely. That's how I try to approach every debate, all these videos I talk about. I agree that there's a huge chunk of people that are never going to change their mind, or will take people like me and SFT and Jason and Neff and Matt. It'll take all of us, and many of them, it may take years to break down those walls. They may never be broken down, but there are many who do, or as you said, are on the fence. And that is part of the reason, a significant portion of the reason that I'm doing all this stuff is, and that present the way that I do is Yeah, I'm not going to convince a T-jump to change his mind, or it's very unlikely that I will. But I can put his positions in context, and I can put his arguments in a logical analysis and present my conclusion to that audience and say, hey, which one of us is presenting the more rational, reasonable, logical, plausible, and probable conclusion? Here's my argument. Here's their argument. It's your choice. What's up, Jason, man? Appreciate you coming on. How you been, man?
Oh, good, thanks, man. How's yourself?
Man, hanging in there. Just getting into doing live streams on my own channel. I'm worried I may get mildly addicted. This is pretty fun.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, there's one thing I wanted to say about Snake. Snake was going on about slavery and all that. Well, first of all,
you're talking about over on Conflict's channel the other day.
Yeah, but first of all, I'll tell you, when say you borrowed a lot of money off a wealthy man to get your small business going in the old day, like back in the Israelite days, and you defaulted on that loan, well, he won't lend you any more than you could pay back in 7 years. But if you default on that loan after 2 years, then you become his slave. Then if any children are born, right, like his wife and that, the master has to take care of his wife and his and kids as well. And the reason why that law was brought in, that the children are the property of the master, was to protect the children, to stop the master from casting them out onto the street, and basically until the 7 years is up. So if he defaulted after, say, 1 year, then he'll become a slave, him and his family, for like if he's got a family, they have to come along for the 6 years. And then once the 6 years is over, then his debt is wiped, and then he can go free, and then he can decide to remain. And a lot of them decided to remain because they got food, board, warm, medical care, you know what I mean? Like what are they going to go back, struggle on the streets and try to get their own little business going and maybe starve and die when they can stay there? You know what I mean? It's not the way Snake makes it out. It's just he's I've told him all this stuff before. He really makes me angry. I mean, really, really angry. Well, and there's a total plausible explanations for everything that he was talking about.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you on that. And with Snake, it's interesting when you listen to him talk about subjects like that one. It is obvious that he relies heavily on these single components invalidating everything else. And I don't agree with this portion of it. Therefore, the other 99% is wrong. Just like as I was talking, just like I was earlier on, if you heard earlier, Jason, I was talking about the atheist who's going up, deny or in favor of the evolutionist who says, "Oh well, we've seen, this little sliver is still considered true. Therefore, all of your arguments and the evidence that negates the other 99% are invalid because this one little piece is true." And so I'm going to ignore the other 99 out of the 100. And I think, the same logic applies to the point, what I was talking about at the beginning of this episode was, do triggered atheists suspend rational thought? And I'm like, I would say so. And to the point you're making about, Snake and such, but and the point I'm making now of, so you refuse to accept any particular historic context, yet you adamantly argue that this therefore negates God, makes the premise of God invalid, the morals of God invalid, and everything else in the Bible is therefore poisoned. I mean, if that is not indicative and the literal embodiment of the point that I'm making, I don't know what is. What do you think about that, Jason?
Yeah, and God tolerated things too. I mean, like, yeah, that's right. But God also tolerated things. He didn't condone them. It's like when King David had concubines, many concubines and stuff like that. God didn't approve of that. He wasn't giving his his rubber stamp, gold stamp on that one and approving of it. He didn't approve of it. He tolerated it because men are lustful, creatures, and he tolerated it. But he loved King David. I mean, there's stuff like that where they say, and I've got a friend, and he uses this as the excuse to lie. This is his excuse where he says the Bible says it's okay to lie. There was this one king, and Israelite king, and he invited all the pagans, the baby murdering, disgusting, filthy pagans, to his palace. And he said, oh, we're going to throw you a great big party. Bring all your statues and your idols, and we're going to throw a big party in your honor and all this sort of stuff. And then when they got there, they slaughtered them all. And it says God was well pleased. Well, God was well pleased with the outcome because he commanded the Israelites to wipe the scumbags off the face of the earth. But God would have much preferred if they had declared war and gone to war in the proper way that God, set out for them to do, to go to war and take these people on and just dominate them and destroy them and wipe them off the face of the earth. I mean, these are people that are throwing little babies into red hot statues' arms and thinking it's all cool. You know what I mean? Like this is just evil people growing up in an evil culture that needed to be exterminated. But see, this one point that he uses that because God was well pleased. God wasn't well pleased with the lie. God was well pleased with the outcome, not the lie. He would have preferred them to go to war. And this is the way people twist the Bible, and it really makes me angry. Because do you believe that the Bible says anywhere that it's okay to lie?
No, I wouldn't say so.
I mean, you can repent for lying, and maybe you'll tell a little white lie to spare someone's feelings or something, but it's still lying. You got to repent for it. But there's so many people out there that do that to the scriptures, and that's what Snake does. Snake just takes little parts of it. He doesn't understand it at all, and the way I explained it is exactly one of the scenarios of exactly why it happens in the Bible. There was no welfare in those days. People went and signed themselves into servitude rather than starve and die on the streets and stuff like that. They couldn't just walk into a welfare office or a soup kitchen. Oh, well, there probably was sort of soup kitchens back then, but not like today. So,
I think the point you're making there too in the kind of the context, right? Yeah, I think in Western society, we have become so soft in regards to existence, right? In terms of like even to this day, what a gigantic percentage of the human population, I mean, is living hand to mouth or foot to mouth, whatever. Tired, brain freeze. They're living in poverty, extreme poverty. They spend 6 hours a day walking to go get water, and here in the United States, I'm not sure, I assume it's similar in a lot of parts of Australia and most of Europe, that nobody's too concerned about starving to death. We're not worried about, am I going to have water to drink? Am I going to die of dehydration? I mean, we don't even think about that kind of stuff. I
never thought of that. That's true.
It amazes me, at least here in the United States, the poor, and obviously there's exceptions to this rule, but the poorest people in the United States are wealthy compared to the majority of the planet. And when people in extreme poverty here have a car, a cell phone, 2 TVs, and the latest generation iPhone, I don't think you're not living in poverty.
Yeah.
Let's put that. You might be living in poverty in relation to the guy that's making $300,000 a year, but you're not in extreme poverty. You're not worried about death.
Yeah.
In terms of your
there's people in the Philippines that wonder if they're just going to eat that day. They only get to eat once a day, and then they worry all day whether they're even going to be able to eat that day. So that's poverty.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And I think this extrapolates to, is there suspension of rational thought? I think this extrapolates out to, large portions of modern society. And I'm sure it plagued portions of society, in times past, but I think it's become extremely prevalent. And Nicholas, I agree. There's plenty of people who can't afford cars.
Yeah.
They can't afford fancy cars necessarily, but it's a very small percentage of Americans who couldn't go get a car. Hey, homeless people on the street, yes, who have no job, and I actually personally help out several homeless people here in where I live, and they go panhandle all day and then go back to a hotel and piece of crap hotel, pay $60 and go to sleep that night, and then the next day they go out and panhandle again and come back and pay their $60 and they live day to day. But that's an extremely small fraction of the United States. And
a teacher said to me once, and this will tie into what we're talking about, and I think you'll appreciate this. Back in when I was a kid, like a little kid in primary school, she said, "Oh, Jason, this is the first computers. Do you remember the first computers? You had to put a cassette tape in, and you had to wait 25 minutes to load one silly little game, like with a couple of dots on the screen." Well, I remember those computers first came in. We were the first ones, the very first ones came into our school like that. And I remember my teacher said to me, she said, "Jason, we live in a golden age. By the time you're my age, computers can work so fast and do so much more so quickly that our working days will only be just a few hours long." That was back in those days when the working day was 6 hours long, right? Then it went to 8 hours, and then it just went insane. But she's talking about, but what I'm talking about is back in those days, you used to have to make a deal with China or another country or America or North or South America. It took a long time to set up a deal, right? I mean, you had to go there, inspect stuff, to have meetings, talk about stuff to set up a big deal. Now you can set up these big deals just like, in 15 minutes. Right. So we're literally doing work that's sometimes, in some cases, not all cases, but in some cases, thousands of times faster than we were back when my teacher said that to me. And yet people are working longer and families are being split up from each other because they have to work longer and longer hours to make ends meet. So what it doesn't make sense, does it? Computers are doing things hundreds and hundreds of times faster than we're doing in the past, hundreds of times faster. Someone's making the money, but it really, by rights, what my teacher said to me sort of should be true. I mean, we really should only have few hour-long working days, and I remember when the weekends were sacred, and now weekends are just like like a normal working day, just about.
No, I agree with you on that. It really is interesting. I
Family,
think
God, love.
Yep.
It's all gone. I mean.
Well, I think honestly, Angel made a good point. Greed is the biggest problem here. I think she's referring to the United States, and I would agree with that to a very large extent. I think it's a variety of factors. I agree with you that why are we working so long?
I don't believe people should be handed stuff for nothing either.
Oh no!
But,
you work. You don't work, you don't eat.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I agree with that premise. Very strongly, but I think the things like you made the point of weekends were sacred, church, family, all those kind of things. Well, what's happened? We see a skyrocket in broken homes, single parents. I'm one. The obsession with the material stuff and a increase in people not the broken home, as well as the increase in people who don't go to church, don't believe, don't think about these things, and are so, because they are told there's nothing else other than this life, become obsessed with the physical world and the stuff they can have, because if they don't get it now, there is no point in doing anything else. And I think that has dramatically increased the the issues that we're talking about, as well as given people, the Machiavellians of the world, given them a gigantic opportunity to take advantage of people. And, we've removed,
That's why communism never works. The only way communism could work, communism's a great idea, but the only way it could work is if God himself came down out of heaven and he ruled over the communism. Then it would be perfect. You know what I mean? Like man can never do it. Man is so corrupt and evil that you just give him too much power and he's just off with the pixies and that's it.
Well, it's a very interesting point you're making there. It's funny. Was it Thomas More? Thomas More's Utopia that has often been postulated and presented as, oh, look at this. He believed in the Commonwealth or the commune concept, and he was thinking about communism before Karl Marx and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, you guys don't. Thanks for stopping by, Honesty Angel. Appreciate you as always. People forget that he actually wrote that as a satire, and that, especially back then, the word utopia meant, the original definition was no place. You applied that to something that couldn't exist. It wasn't reasonable to think actually could happen. It was this ultimate, oh, cool, it'd be awesome if this, this would be the perfect condition, but we all recognize this isn't actually possible. And now we hear people pushing for this utopia and not recognizing that you're actually pushing for something that isn't actually a reasonable thing to be pushing for. And I think I think a huge portion of that, and the reason people have open minds towards communism and all that, is they want to deny the premise that you made, which is humans are ultimately corrupt. And ultimately that concept will fail because of that. That's the primary variable, is human corruption. Do you agree with that, Jason?
Yeah, humans are just, like people are just, you whatever bad you can expect out of people, you just expect that. They're just, but it's what I've noticed, but the majority of people out there are just out to get you. And what I'll say is this to people is, you hang around atheists, you're more likely to get ripped off and screwed over. You hang around Christians, you still could get ripped off and screwed over, but you got a better chance of not getting ripped off and screwed over, and probably not as much. You know what I mean? Yep. Like it's people think, oh, because Christians this and Christians can be little scumbags as well, but some of them. But it's you got a better chance. That's let me put it that way. Like if I was gonna. I'll never do that now. I'm too old and it's too late. But if I was ever going to have kids, I'd make sure that they went to a Christian school and they were not taught evolution at all. And if the government tried to force me, I'd take the government to court and I'd sue the government for trying to force pseudoscience on my kids, because the government here are forcing schools to, even Christian schools to teach evolution. Otherwise, they'll defund them.
Wow. It's kind of funny here in the States with during the shutdown, all the school closures, basically every child in America became homeschooled. And what was cracking me up about that whole deal was, it's like, okay, so our schools have been talking about how horrible homeschooling is. Now everybody's homeschooling, and they're claiming that this is all well and good. And I'm like, I personally I think homeschooling is great, is my personal opinion. But I'm like, wow, that's an interesting paradigm shift. Yesterday you were claiming all this does is make people nuts and have no social skills and is, a horrible method for teaching. Now you're saying the exact opposite. And this is going to be great. This will work. Like, that's kind of funny. On that change, I'm actually interested to see what percentage of people realize, wow, this is actually working. My kid's learning so much, and I'm getting to spend more time with them. And
they can actually learn about real science instead of learning about a fairy tale about how some amoeba or creature turned into a what do they call it, an amphibian, and crawled out of the water and then turned into this, that, and the other, all the way up to an ape, you know what I mean, and then a man. And instead of learning about fairy tales like that, which have no basis in science whatsoever, then they could actually learn about real science. Now that would be a turn up for the books, wouldn't it? I mean, just to actually learn about real science and just leave all the assumptions out. Teach about what we know to be factual science. Teach them about medical science, about, plants and animals and, biology, real biology, not, evolutionary fairy tale imagined, this is the way we think it wished it happened in the past stuff. And evolution's actually holding children back, because no surgeon ever went to a book of evolutionary origins before, a complicated surgery that he hadn't done for a while to brush up on his surgical techniques. It's like to get it's just, evolution is the most useless steaming pile of cow dung that there ever was. It's totally anti-science. It holds science back. It's got nothing to do, you know what I mean? Like you go and have your religion, have your belief, go and believe in God, believe in this, believe in that, but learn about real biology, real science that saves lives and helps people. Don't get sucked into this lie where people say, and this just makes me laugh, the evolutionists I've been debating, and they've said, well, it's because of evolution they made this medical discovery. And I'm just like, and here's the citation to prove it. And it's just like, you read it, you just feel like they're completely, they got no idea. I'm not going to say what I really think, otherwise you'd get channel banned.
I honestly wonder how many discoveries have been made in spite of the methods that they're using, right? I mean, when you just think about the evolutionary algorithms and the just incredible amount of computer processing power, human brain power that is spent trying to figure out what would have had to have happened in order for this to go from this to this.
Mate, can you imagine? They put all that money and energy into actual science and actually helping people and, educating people around the world and doing, can you imagine? Just think of the billions that's just wasted on this rubbish. It is trillions, probably. There's probably thousands of billions of dollars that have been wasted on this, trillions and trillions of dollars. Can you imagine what that would have done, how much good that could have done in other areas?
Well,
than just trying to prove that a dinosaur walked the earth 65 million years ago.
I think about that on a very regular basis when I'm reading papers on medical discoveries, now that they have started to very actively consider quote unquote junk DNA as, primary causes for so many different diseases. And I'm like, okay, so obviously people, go back and forth on how much time it's been since the shift to people starting to, view it as worthwhile. But it's reasonable to conclude there's been no less than 30 to 40 years of time where that portion of the genome was not being considered from a medical perspective. No less than 30 or 40 years, right? And when you look at the discoveries they've been making, just in the last 5 years, really since the ENCODE project as an example. So 8 years at this point, right? When you look at all the things they've been able to figure out just in the last 8 years, if you extrapolate that back 40 years, I mean, how much further along would we be in understanding disease. I mean, I would wager it's almost an incalculable difference and amount of discoveries that could have been made in, advancements overall. Because I mean, just things, I'm constantly reading these papers and I'm just like, wow,
they could have cured all
that's
cancers.
cool.
Everything. They could have cured all cancers, all disease. I mean, if they put all their time, energy, and money instead of into that garbage, and they put it into, like, as these new mutations pop up, like, asthma's a mutation, all different types of cancers. When these new mutations pop up, then they can kill them. You know what I mean? Then they could work on it and kill it. But what do? No, it's more important to find out that we, evolved from a amoeba or whatever the hell it is, and to a, whatever. It's ridiculous.
I'd say as a sidebar, one of the things that always cracks me up, and this definitely applies to suspension of rational thought. Okay, folks, we don't know how males and females exist. We cannot explain this. Yet, this is a fundamental component to a gigantic percentage of life. We don't know how this happened or what would have been required for this to occur. Our variety of theories we've come up with have all collapsed. And yet, per their own argument, the whole reproduction piece is, a fundamental element to evolution, right? But you can't.
Evolution's at 150. Evolution's at 150 years of failure.
Come on, huh? Say that again.
Evolution's at 150 years of failures, nothing but failures, and it's still called a fact. I was just chucking that in there. I'll shut up now. You can keep going. Sorry.
No. I agree with you completely on that. It's very ironic. At what point do your theories have to be completely repurposed, modified, and in some context, in some aspects, take 180s, and yet you still claim that it is proven beyond all doubt? I mean, if that's not the, that's why I love to make this use the phrase, in any other context, this would be considered irrational. In any other context, you insert whatever component of evolution, and I'm like, I don't know what to say at this point. Like, you agree with me that in any other context, my point is correct, except for this one.
Did you know that every single anomaly in our solar system with the planets, they always say it's an asteroid did it. I mean, you look at it. It's I wrote up this thing, right, that I saw on this show, and it's just like, it's just everything we're talking about. It all ties in. It's just completely irrational. I mean, it's like there's one planet that's spinning too fast in the wrong direction or something, and 5 asteroids hit it in one after the other at the right, so like spun it like a top and kept it spinning, and or something like that. I mean, it's just that every single time there's a problem, like, Mercury, because it's so dense on the outer core, it should have sunk to the inner core. The reason why that's there is because an asteroid hit it and broke away the softer outer core, and it did actually sink down over all that time. And it's just one thing after another, all the gas giants, the different chemical compositions, the fact that the moon is deficient in iron and the earth is rich in iron. All of these things, it's all the way through from beginning to end. You've got orbits, that elliptical orbits. You've got all these weird planets rolling along like balls. You're spinning in different directions, and every single explanation for all of this weird stuff is an asteroid did it. And I've got every single planet in our solar system, all the way from Mercury, all the way right out to the end out there. And it's every single problem that they've got, it's always an asteroid did it. That's their rescue device. Anything to do with the solar system, if it's out of whack or something's just not right or it's spinning the wrong way, you can be certain. Don't even ask what it is that did it. Just say, okay, it was an asteroid that did it, and that's all you need to know.
I'd say I forget which gas giant it was. It was either Jupiter or Saturn. I forget which one. Anyway, I remember reading this and I'm like, okay, you guys actually think this? Okay. Apparently, one of the gas giants supposedly used to be close to the sun, or like came in close to the sun and then went back out again. And I'm like,
what?
When I was reading it, I was like, what? What? How do you come to this conclusion that is a remotely rational position to take, that it got closer to the sun and then went away? Like, isn't the only thing we're actually concerned about is either flying away or collapsing into, not zooming in and then zooming back out? Like, what the? And I remember when I was reading through that, it was something, I forget where I was reading about this, but I was sitting there thinking, like, I don't know how how much of this stuff I can take seriously that I'm finding from, supposedly credible institutions when they're trying to explain XYZ anomaly with something like this, And I mean, heck, just the moon, the impact theory for the moon's formation. I mean, when you really think about like
capture theory, impact theory, freaking all those different stupid theories, none of them work.
When you look at the math and like, oh, if all of these variables happened perfectly, then my hypothesis could explain the moon. And I'm like, what? Okay, I guess that thing that has your theory you've come up with and the math you've derived, if it's off by a minuscule percentage, it's not even a remotely plausible conclusion. But you're going to say, oh, because the moon is here, therefore this is must be what happened. I mean, if that doesn't embody the whole argument the atheists always like to make about the fine tuning, it's like you literally created the target around the bullet hole. I mean, anyway. That stuff that always gets me. Oh,
sorry, man. My mate had a problem. He was just telling me about it. Yeah, okay.
Oh, no problem. Yeah.
Sorry, man. Sorry, I was just Oh,
that's no worries, man.
Yeah, that's all sorted now. So yeah, no problems. Yeah, you were saying anyway. Yeah, but yeah. Sorry, I got off track.
I went on a little bit more of a diatribe about the
that's all right,
about the moon in context of
Oh
recreating.
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
you've created all of the variables. The only formula that is correct is the one that equals your answer.
Well, the moon is deficient in iron, and the Earth is rich in iron. So if the moon come from an impact of a Mars-sized asteroid hitting the Earth, which is ridiculous because that'd be traveling at like 80,000 miles an hour or something. I mean, and then the moon should be just as rich in iron as the Earth, right? Because it'd be all part of the Earth, all mixed up and jumbled up together. So that just blows that one out of the water.
Have they ever come up with a answer for why I swear I'm going to crack up if you say it was an asteroid did it. Have they ever come up with an answer for why the depth of the dust on the moon was so small?
Actually, I've got a write up on that. I'm going to check on that, but I'm pretty sure it'd be something like an asteroid. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. I've got to look. It might not be. If I remember correctly, the moon lander. I'm pretty sure it is an asteroid. I'm not sure. I've got it written up, but I'm gonna have a look at it and I'll post it in the comments later.
I remember they had. I think they designed the moon lander to have like extra long legs.
Yeah.
To account for
the down into the. That's right. It was supposed to sink. It was supposed to be really deep.
2 inches or something, like an inch and a half, 2 inches, something like that. It was very minimal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good thing there wasn't any. Didn't have to deal with much gravity when they were getting off that sucker. Yeah. Otherwise, it'd have been like, "What the? I'm 20 feet up."
Yeah. Yeah, it's so too bad if they got there and the moon was like solid iron and it was just like this little magneton, and then and they land on it and they like stuck to it and that's it. Ah, that would be yeah, no, but yeah, they expected to sink down. They expected to just sink down into it, and it's really funny because then they landed on it. There's only a few inches of dust on the surface, which is probably I can't wait to read that thing. I'm going to laugh my head off so hard if I read that and then it says that they think it's an asteroid that hit it. I'm just going to crack up so much. I'll put it in. But either way, whether it is an asteroid or not, their explanation, I'll put it in the comments section later when this video is uploaded.
Yeah, that whole yeah, we're kind of when I was a kid, I still am, but when I was a kid, I was a very avid science fiction reader, and I mean I was reading 4 or 5 books a week, and I mean up until I was about 16, I had read literally every Star Wars, every Star Trek book ever written, right? And this is an example of how much I read. And anyway, when I think about now, when I look back on that, and I contemplate some of the positions that are put forth as just in theories to explain all this stuff, I'm like, man, these people make the sci-fi writers I used to read as a kid, they put them to shame on the hypothetical scenarios they come up with to explain things to fit inside of their worldview. And I get a great deal of entertainment out of it. And as you said, although in the context of our solar system, an asteroid did it, isn't exactly original, but
yeah, it's scary, man. It's just everything in the solar system that they can't explain. Basically, the planets, like it's just I've got this big. I'll get the. I'm going in. I'm having a look for it now. I'll find it and then I'll read it. Drive. Take me a while though. My laptop moves at a snail's pace. Right. It's an old one, but it's only used for very limited stuff. It's got no high security whatever on it, and it's got a good antivirus. So,
Coffee, hey, Coffee just left a comment. Yeah, man, I haven't read a nonfiction book in at least 15 years, probably longer than that. I now read usually 2 to 3 books a month now, and they're all nonfiction. And then there's no telling how many research papers we'll peruse through. I mean, today I'd say I read at least 4 papers on some different subjects. One I was looking at earlier was on machine learning in and artificial intelligence and its application and inspiration from biological systems. Which I think is extraordinarily fascinating. But I'm obsessed now with, and I have been for years, but I used to be obsessed when I was heavily involved in business. I was constantly reading books on economics, business, technology, processes, marketing, a plethora of topics like that. And now I'm heavily involved in reading things about scientific research and in a variety of fields, whether it be biology, quantum mechanics. Those are my 2 major interests, and then dive in a little bit into astronomy here and there. But it's right now I'm hyper interested in genetics, and I think some of that comes from my background in technology and software, web development, apps, that kind of thing. The more I recognize the more that I recognize the astounding similarities the more my fascination grows. I used to always be trying to figure out about the latest and greatest APIs and new software languages and capabilities and all these different things. And the more and more I learn about genetics and biology, some of the other stuff almost is boring in comparison when you really think about it.
Yeah, I found the stuff on the moon, if you like. The moon has Mare on the side facing us, which are large flat volcanic lava flows caused by stellar impacts. Yet the other side has no Mare or Maria at all. If evolution was true, you should get even impacts all over the moon, not just on one side and not the other side. According to the solar system accretion model, these large impacts should be random and all over both sides, going by billions of years. Another sticky situation for evolutionists to lie their way around, so they can keep the funding dollars flowing, because if they were honest, the money would dry up and they know it. Also, the moon's rocks are too chemically different from the Earth. If the universe formed via the nebula hypothesis, it should have should have the same chemical composition, as it had to have formed in the same area of the solar system or the universe. The accretion theory has been debunked, the capture theory has been debunked, and the fission theory has been debunked, which leaves by evolutionists, mind you, which leaves evolutionary scientists at a loss to explain the origin of the moon. But of course, they imply they know everything. They know nothing. The giant impact theory says a Mars-sized asteroid impacted the Earth and that the moon formed from the rocks and the dust created by the impact. A Mars-sized asteroid traveling at tens of thousands of miles an hour hitting the Earth, an absolutely stupid hypothesis, as I said above. This is ridiculous when you realize the moon is very deficient in iron. The Earth is rich in iron. The moon, if formed at the same time and the same place or broke away from the Earth, it should be chemically identical. The moon is moving away from the Earth at about 1.5 inches a year, calculated backwards, blah, blah, blah. We know all that stuff. We've been over that. Calculated backwards, you get 1.4 billion years ago, the moon and the Earth were supposedly together in orbit around, anyway, you know all that stuff. That's old hat, but the moon recession theory and all that sort of stuff. I mean, you got Mars, and another thing I want to say about Mars is I've got photos of Mars, of an area before a huge dust storm, and then there was a month-long dust storm, and then after the month-long dust storm, they photographed the exact same area, and have a guess what it looked like. It looked like a canyon that had been eroded away by water. It looked exactly like water had washed through there. This canyon had been created in this 1 month long dust storm, because the wind acts like a liquid. It's a liquid. It's a gas. It's a liquid, but it's just a thinner liquid. So it acts like a liquid, and when it's blowing around and blowing sand and it wears things away with the sand, it actually looks like it's an incredible photo. I mean, I hope I can find it. I'd love to find the video that it's on. It was on the Northwest Creation Network. One of their videos. He showed the photo of before the storm and then after the month-long storm, and it was just amazing. It just looked like this massive water eroded feature. And if you had have seen that feature without knowing that was created by that dust storm, everybody would be going, oh, look, it was created by flowing water and all this over millions of years. And no, it was created in 1 month. And it's massive.
That's interesting. Yeah, it is interesting how so many different aspects and disciplines of science are so tremendously impacted by the Darwinian worldview and timescale requirements for all of their things to be true. Therefore, there can be no other explanation. even if it is observed in real time or relative real time. Well, that's an abnormality. That's an outlier. There's no way that could explain what we see here, because we say that this is how it happened, and there is no other explanation, even though we just witnessed one. You know, I know there's multiple canyons around the United States, same kind of thing, gigantic flood, local flood, and boom, there's now a canyon that wasn't there literally inside of a year, right? A couple months.
Yeah.
And it's this new thing that in any other context you would argue, or they would argue, must have taken millions of years to occur.
Yeah.
So why are you saying that I am absolutely being irrational? Or wait a minute, you are saying that something we observed in the here and now, in the real time, which contradicts your position, couldn't possibly be relevant or accurate conclusion about this other piece that shows a very similar cause. Which one of us is suspended rational thought? Just saying. You're constantly demanding empirical evidence, but when it's presented to you, obviously I'm speaking rhetorically, when it's presented,
okay,
you don't.
I've got it here.
Oh, you found it?
Just quickly. Sorry, when you're ready, man. When you finish.
No. I'm done with my little tangent there.
Sorry, I was just going to say. They say an asteroid hit Mars and the violence of the impact stripped away most of the atmosphere and water. Can you see the contradiction here? They say that comets brought 322,500,000 cubic miles of water to Earth. The hundreds of millions of impacts that would have needed to bring all that water here would have done damage to Earth, you know what I mean? And all this, and then they say, an asteroid hit Mars and stripped away its atmosphere, and that's why it's got no atmosphere. No, it's got no atmosphere because it's not big enough, man. It hasn't got enough mass to hold on to the atmosphere. So it's always going to have a thin atmosphere, and it will never ever be populated. I'm sorry to inform all you people out there that think that Mars might be populated one day. It's a complete fantasy. It will not happen. Not unless they build massive cities that are completely, hermetically sealed and, with plants growing in them and artificial light and, some sort of power source. And, it's just not going to happen ever. Well,
it's interesting you talk about on Mars. One of the things that they don't talk about, actually, I read some stuff on this a couple years ago, and they were talking about how one of the biggest variables that they were concerned about in terms of like humans actually going to Mars was the two things. One was as we already know this from the International Space Station, the extended lack of gravity has significantly negative effects on the body. But then number two, they weren't sure if they could, and were significantly concerned about actually being able to build the level of shielding that would be needed to prevent significant damage from cosmic radiation. And when you think about that, what people forget is, people go up to the International Space Station, all that stuff. Yeah, they do. What they forget is that our Earth's magnetic field,
they're still protected by it.
They're still inside of the Earth's magnetic field and are being protected. And I'm like, okay, let's think about this. You're looking at right now anyway, 6-month trip. Like, that's a long time to be getting bombarded.
No way, mate. Not me.
Long time.
For all the money and the riches in the universe.
But something I thought was very interesting was you could actually shorten the travel time if we looked at nuclear powered spacecraft. And I didn't know this. I was curious one day and I was Googling some stuff. Did you know that they actually built out a prototype back in the late 60s, early 70s? And then when all of the all the freak out about nuclear power happened, that project was shut down. Fast forward to, I think it was like 2011, 2012, that project was reopened, and they're actually actively working on building a new prototype.
Yes, that's right, because NASA is actively purchasing as much plutonium as it possibly can, high-grade plutonium, to power it basically powers the what do you call them again? The satellites and things like that. And yeah, I have no doubt they're developing ways of using that to power spacecraft in space. But they have to work out some sort of shielding way to shield the people.
Shielding for the humans, but one of the things that has sparked the reinterest in the nuclear powered spacecraft is, all of the talk and, which is kind of cool in my opinion, is the whole premise of going and being able to mine the asteroid belt. And when you think about that, of if you have a robotic mining ship that is nuclear powered, and if you're able to remove, have it have humans on it, but it can just go back and forth, and you're not having to worry about running out of fuel and being able to land and all that stuff and bring the stuff back. Suddenly, the proposition of being able to mine and take advantage of all of those resources that are hanging out there becomes a relatively reasonable proposition. Simultaneously, in the context of going to Mars, as we were originally talking about, I forget the exact math, but I know the speed that could be generated from at least the version that they had tried to build back in the 60s would have cut the trip time to Mars in half. And
3 months.
Yep. And I think even if you did it the closest, you calculated it so it'd be at the closest the time of the year when when you reached the angle, you took off at an angle to hit it the closest point. I think that's to get down to I think it was 6 to 8 weeks. And if you had the nuclear powered ship, and I was like, man, that's another one of those things of, man, they were working on that back in the 60s. Can you imagine how much further along they would have been on that if we'd spent 50 years trying to figure that out and develop that technology? That'd have been awesome.
Yeah, instead of spending, how many billions have they spent trying to prove that the Big Bang happened? I mean, let's put all that money into exploration and things that actually help people, and learning that you're just a cosmic meatbag mistake, is not exactly, constructive stuff to put into people's heads. Oh, it's my dog whinging at me. Little bugger. All right.
Yeah,
I can take the phone with me because I'm on the phone, so I can take it with me. So
something I think people forget about is that we view things as being huge, but the size and the distance are directly relative to the speed at which you can travel and the time it will take. And I often wonder how much of a barrier to innovation and creativity is caused by just that, it's so far away, therefore I'm not going to actually think about it. And I think that premise applies, in a lot of different environments, but in different fields and disciplines. But it's pretty crazy. Well, man, it's getting late for me, and I got to get up early in the morning. I'm starting to fade. I appreciate you coming on and
no problems
with my little do atheists suspend rational thought when they're triggered. That's I'm having some fun with that whole topic. I'm working on. Anyway, anybody who's watching this now or watches it later, I'm looking to do another round of additional symptoms of a triggered atheist. So any things that you recognized as symptoms, send them my way, and I'll see if I can incorporate some of them into my next video on that topic.
I might be a bit broken up because I haven't got my headphones on, but I'll see you later. Have
Thanks,
a good day. God bless.
Hey, same to you, man. Bye.